Imagine a chilling whisper from history, a tale so audacious, so impossible, it was deliberately buried. Not in a dusty archive, but from our collective memory. This isn't just a story, it's a phantom limb of America's past, a wound that never fully healed, because the truth itself vanished. What if 250 souls, living under the brutal thumb of ownership, could simply evaporate? Not through death, not through escape, but through an act of collective will so profound, it defied every law of man and nature. On March 14, 1847, dawn broke over the riverside plantation in Virginia, revealing an anomaly that would baffle generations. A ledger meticulously kept stated 250 souls present at roll call. By dusk, the same ledger, reviewed in disbelief, reads 0, not escaped, not deceased, simply absent, as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. They left no footprints in the mud, no broken fences, no stolen provisions, just an overseer's chilling report. All quarters found empty at evening inspection. No signs of disturbance. No explanation. This is the story of how the impossible was orchestrated, why the truth was silenced for over a century, and the defiant birth of a town that lived and died in secrecy. The Riverside Plantation was a sprawling monument to industrial cruelty, covering 4,000 acres of lush Virginia bottomland that the Hargrove family treated like a high-precision factory. Every inch of the soil was dedicated to the relentless production of tobacco and corn, fueling a massive wealth that flowed directly into the hands of greedy Richmond merchants. For over 3 decades, the estate operated with a mechanical coldness, driven by Thomas Hargrove's obsession with total efficiency and meticulous record-keeping. The boundaries were naturally enforced by the deep currents of the James River and the suffocating darkness of the western pine forests. Within this enclosure, life was stripped of its humanity and reduced to a series of data points in leather-bound ledgers kept in the main house. When William Hargrove inherited the land in 1835, he elevated his father's rigid systems into a form of religious devotion that governed every second of the day. Life began at a sharp 6 in the morning with a mandatory roll call, and ended with a final, intrusive inspection of the living quarters at 8. Every meal was served at a precise time, and work assignments were posted on a board like orders for a military campaign. William's careful handwriting filled separate ledgers with documented infractions and their subsequent consequences, ensuring that no act of perceived laziness went unpunished. The red brick main house sat atop a hill like a watchtower, its white columns serving as silent sentinels over the captive population. From his second-floor study, William could observe the fields and the quarters simultaneously, maintaining a god-like gaze over his entire domain. Catherine Hargrove complimented her husband's coldness by managing the domestic operations with a firm hand and a set of her own uncompromising journals. She oversaw a staff of 12 who lived in a separate building, ensuring that even the internal household functioned like a well-oiled machine of service. The Hargrove children were raised in this vacuum of empathy, viewing the enslaved people not as humans, but as components of a profitable system. William Jr. managed the tobacco, Thomas oversaw the livestock, and Elizabeth acted as a teacher, all while absorbing the family's clinical worldview. They believed that their enlightened approach of providing adequate food and clothing made them superior to other owners. This arrogance blinded them to the reality that they were not masters of souls, but merely temporary jailers of a growing, hidden fire. Beneath the surface of this forced compliance and the predictable rhythm of plantation life, an entirely separate world was being constructed in the shadows of the quarters. The Hargroves were constitutionally incapable of recognizing the weight of the whispered conversations and coded messages that passed between workers in the fields. While the family focused on their profitability and the mechanical precision of their harvest, a deep network of resistance was taking root. Every documented bushel of corn and every recorded birth was merely a distraction from the monumental act of defiance that was being planned. The laborers played their roles perfectly, maintaining the illusion of submission while secretly evaluating the vulnerabilities of the very system that sought to own them. They transformed their daily routines into a camouflage, using the Hargroves' own obsession with predictability against the family. By early 1847, the atmosphere at Riverside was heavy with a tension that the owners were too proud to sense or acknowledge in their diaries. The well-treated laborers William boasted about to his visitors were actually architects of a vanishing act that would eventually shatter the family's legacy. The diversity of the population, ranging from African-born elders to skilled American-born craftsmen, provided a collective intelligence that no ledger could ever quantify. They were building toward the night of March 14th, with a patience that had been forged through years of back-breaking labor and silent observation. The mechanical precision of the plantation was about to be met with a human precision so profound it would leave the Hargroves standing in an empty field. The seed of disappearance had been planted long ago, and it was finally ready to break through the surface of the Virginia soil. The architects of the Riverside escape were a diverse group of individuals whose specialized skills transformed them from laborers into a formidable clandestine council. At the center of this group was Samuel, an elder in his 60s who carried the ancient wisdom of his African birthplace and the sharp survival instincts of the New World. While the Hargroves saw only a bent body and white hair, the community looked to him as a navigator who could read the stars like a map. He possessed a profound knowledge of herbal medicine and oral history, which allowed him to serve as a vital bridge between the African-born and American-born residents. Samuel's intellect was the foundation of their unity, providing the strategic guidance and moral authority necessary to keep a 250-person secret for years. His role was not just to advise, but to ensure that the cultural identity of the people remained intact even as they planned to vanish. Marcus, the head carpenter, was the structural genius who translated the dream of freedom into a tangible, albeit hidden, reality through his mastery of wood and metal. Having been trained by a master craftsman in Baltimore, he possessed a rare ability to read architectural drawings and calculate complex structural loads that baffled even the overseer. The Hargroves valued his efficiency in maintaining the plantation's physical infrastructure, never suspecting that his powerful hands were diverted toward a much more dangerous project. He lived in a larger cabin with a wooden floor he had built himself, which served as the literal and metaphorical gateway to their liberation. Marcus was a man of few words but immense action, working alongside his teenage son, David, to ensure their technical preparations were flawless. His wife, Hannah, used her position as a seamstress in the main house to act as a primary intelligence officer for the movement. The logistics of the operation were managed by Danina, the head cook, whose control over the plantation's food supply made her the movement's quartermaster. She was a woman of commanding personality, who moved with ease between the high-pressure environment of the main house kitchen and the communal fires of the quarters. This mobility allowed her to redirect salt, dried meat, and grain into hidden stockpiles without raising a single note of suspicion from Catherine Hargrove. Danina's intelligence network was fueled by her ability to carry messages under the guise of her domestic duties, ensuring that every family remained informed and fed. She understood that a starving group could not survive the grueling journey to the mountains, so she spent years perfecting the art of the slow, invisible harvest. Her kitchen staff of 4 became her most trusted couriers, weaving the threads of the plan into the very fabric of the daily meals. Safety and mobility were the responsibilities of Esther the midwife and Benjamin the stable hand, 2 individuals who understood the terrain better than the owners themselves. Esther's role as a healer granted her a rare degree of movement, as she was often called upon by both the enslaved and the white families to manage illnesses. She used this freedom to gather medicinal herbs and prepare travel kits that would be essential for treating injuries or sickness during their eventual trek. Benjamin, meanwhile, used his frequent supply runs to Richmond to memorize the geography of the surrounding Virginia territory, identifying every patrol point and hidden path. He learned the locations of free black communities and the specific mountain valleys that offered the best chance for a permanent, undetected settlement. Together, they ensured that once the community left the tunnel, they would not be wandering blindly into a hostile and unfamiliar wilderness. The younger generation, represented by Joseph the blacksmith and Miriam the housemaid, provided the technical innovation and literacy that the mission required. Joseph was often dismissed by the Hargroves as simple-minded because of his quiet nature, yet he was secretly fabricating the specialized metal brackets and digging tools needed for the tunnel. His forge became a sanctuary of resistance, where the ringing of his hammer masked the creation of implements designed to dismantle the plantation's physical barriers. Miriam, on the other hand, had secretly taught herself to read by studying the books in the Hargrove library while she cleaned the expansive rooms. Her literacy allowed her to intercept newspapers and correspondence, providing the core group with crucial updates on the political climate and the movement of local militias. This collective of experts operated as a shadow government, ensuring that every man, woman, and child at Riverside was prepared for the impossible. The seed of the Great Vanishing was planted during a frigid winter night in 1842, when Samuel presented Marcus with a choice that defied the laws of their reality. They stood in the dim light of the carpentry shop, surrounded by the scent of cedar and the heavy silence of the sleeping plantation, debating the nature of the impossible. Samuel argued that they had been conditioned to believe escape was a physical impossibility, when in reality, it was merely a problem of perception and geometry. He proposed that fleeing north was a predictable path that would lead them directly into the hands of waiting patrols and professional slave catchers. Instead of running toward a known destination, he suggested they vanish into the very heart of Virginia, finding sanctuary in the remote, rugged valleys of the western mountains. This shift in strategy transformed the entire community from potential fugitives into ghosts, preparing them to haunt the very system that sought to contain them. Marcus took this conceptual spark and applied his engineering genius to solve the primary obstacle of their containment, the visibility of their movement. He realized that 250 people could never cross the open fields or the guarded gates without being detected by the overseer's watchful eyes or the neighboring patrols. His solution was as terrifying as it was brilliant, proposing that the community must travel through the earth itself to bypass the plantation's rigid boundaries. He spent months in silent calculation, sketching elaborate designs on scrap wood that he burned immediately after memorizing the complex angles and distances. The tunnel would need to stretch over half a mile, reaching from the floor of his own cabin to a concealed ravine near the river's edge. This was not merely a hole in the ground, but a sophisticated subterranean passage that would require years of backbreaking, secret labor to manifest. The engineering challenges of the tunnel were immense, requiring a level of precision that would have impressed the finest architects of the Richmond tobacco warehouses. Marcus had to account for the dense, unforgiving clay of the Virginia soil, which threatened to collapse and bury them alive with every foot they advanced. He designed a system of timber frames and supports, using wood that was quietly diverted from official plantation construction projects over several years. Joseph the blacksmith worked in tandem with him, fabricating custom metal brackets and digging tools that were disguised as broken equipment needing repair in the forge. They even developed a primitive but effective ventilation system using hollow reeds that reached the surface, carefully hidden among the natural undergrowth above. Every inch of the tunnel was a testament to their collective intelligence, proving that their minds remained free, even while their bodies were held in chains. When Marcus finally presented the finalized plan to the core group of 15 leaders, the initial reaction was one of pure, suffocating disbelief and fear. Denina pointed out that moving such a massive volume of earth without leaving a single trace on the surface seemed like an insurmountable task for any group. The Marcus countered by explaining that they had time on their side, suggesting a timeline of 4 to 5 years to ensure the work remained completely invisible. They realized that they had no other viable alternative, as every other road to freedom was paved with the certainty of capture or death. The tunnel represented a gamble against the earth itself, but it was the only impossible plan that offered a sliver of genuine hope for the entire community. With a somber and resolute agreement, they committed themselves to a life of double labor, working for the Hargroves by day and for their own souls by night. The decision to stay in Virginia rather than flee to the north was a masterstroke of psychological warfare that would eventually baffle the state's investigators. By choosing the Western Mountains, they were choosing a terrain that was considered uninhabitable and useless by the plantation elite, who relied on flat, fertile bottomland. Benjamin's knowledge of the mountain gaps and hidden valleys provided the map for this new life, ensuring they weren't just escaping from something, but traveling to something. They began to view the plantation not as their permanent home, but as a temporary staging ground for a much larger and more ancient migration. The plan was set to begin in the spring of 1844, marking the start of a grueling 4-year countdown toward a single hour of liberation. From that moment on, every step taken on the riverside soil was a deliberate lie, concealing the growing hollow that was forming beneath the Hargroves' feet. The labor of liberation began in April 1844 under the cover of a moonless sky and the rhythmic chirping of Virginia cicadas. Beneath the heavy floorboards of Marcus's cabin, a small group of men initiated a 4-year descent into the cold, silent depths of the earth. The work was an agonizing exercise in patience, requiring them to move through dense clay and tangled roots, using only primitive, muffled tools. Every shovelful of soil represented a fragment of their stolen lives being reclaimed, yet it also carried the terrifying risk of immediate execution. They operated in a world of absolute darkness, save for the flickering, low flame lamps that consumed the precious little oxygen available in the shaft. This first phase was the most dangerous, as the sound of a single misplaced strike could betray their location to the overseer's nearby cottage. Managing the excavated earth was a logistical miracle that required the active, silent cooperation of the entire 250-person community. Each night, the diggers filled burlap sacks with heavy, wet clay that was then hauled up the vertical shaft to be processed. During the day, These sacks were emptied with surgical precision across the 4,000 acres of the plantation to prevent any suspicious mounds. Denina mixed the soil into the compost heaps, while the field hands worked it into the tobacco rows and the sprawling vegetable gardens. No single area received enough fresh earth to change the landscape, ensuring that the Hargroves remained blind to the massive hollow growing beneath them. This invisible distribution was a testament to their collective discipline, as a single mistake in disposal would have unraveled years of backbreaking subterranean progress. As the tunnel extended beyond 400 feet, the physical and psychological toll on the diggers became a heavy, constant burden that tested their resolve. The air grew increasingly foul and stagnant, forcing Marcus to refine his ventilation system of hollow reeds to prevent the men from suffocating. Joseph continued to forge metal reinforcements in the blacksmith shop, disguised as iron bands for wagon wheels, to prevent the frequent cave-ins that threatened their lives. The constant moisture in the tunnel led to respiratory ailments and skin infections, which Esther treated with secret herbal salves prepared in her small infirmary. Despite the exhaustion that threatened to collapse their bodies, they maintained their daily quotas for the Hargroves to avoid any suspicion of their nocturnal activities. Their lives became a split reality, characterized by forced submission in the sunlight and fierce, sovereign labor in the darkness of the pit. By the end of 1846, the tunnel had reached its final length of 800 feet, successfully spanning the distance from the quarters to the ravine. The exit was a masterpiece of deception, featuring a false rock face constructed by Marcus that blended seamlessly into the natural limestone of the riverbank. Inside, the passage was a narrow but functional artery of freedom, supported by timber frames that Marcus had painstakingly notched and fitted by hand. The community began to move survival caches into small chambers carved into the tunnel walls, hiding dried meats, medical supplies, and sturdy shoes. Every family was assigned a specific place in the eventual line of march, and children were taught to communicate through silent hand signals. The tunnel was no longer just an engineering project. It had become a living, breathing sanctuary where the hope of an entire generation was safely stored. The final months of the project were defined by a suffocating tension as the community waited for the perfect environmental and social conditions to strike. Ruth's system of coded hymns became the heartbeat of the quarters, providing updates on the tunnel's stability and the readiness of the hidden supplies. They watched the Hargroves with predatory intensity, documenting the family's social calendar and the overseer's drinking habits to find a window of vulnerability. The tunnel was inspected every night for signs of shifting earth or water seepage that could jeopardize the mass movement of 250 people. As the winter of 1847 thawed into a damp spring, the realization that their 4-year odyssey was nearing its climax filled the quarters with a quiet, electric energy. They had built a road to the impossible, and all that remained was the courage to walk through the darkness one final time. The moment of transformation arrived on March 13, 1847, a Saturday chosen for its predictable patterns of distraction and the heavy indulgence of the plantation's captors. While the Hargrove family entertained wealthy guests with fine wines and elaborate stories in the main house, 250 people were silently preparing to vanish forever. The overseer, Gerald Pritchard, completed his final evening rounds with a drunken sense of security, never noticing the electric stillness that had settled over the quarters. Families huddled in the shadows of their cabins, wearing every sturdy garment they possessed, and whispering final instructions to children who understood the gravity of the silence. Marcus stood by his hidden floor panel, the weight of 4 years of labor and the hopes of his entire community resting on his powerful shoulders. As the first group descended into the cool, damp earth, the mechanical rhythm of the plantation was replaced by the heartbeat of a people, finally reclaiming their own destiny. The migration through the 800-foot tunnel was a masterclass in collective discipline, as men, women, and the elderly crawled toward the promise of a life without chains. In the suffocating darkness of the passage, the only sound was the muffled shuffling of feet and the steady, rhythmic breathing of those who had lived for years in anticipation of this hour. Marcus and Benjamin led the vanguard, ensuring the structural integrity of the timber frames while guiding the vulnerable through the narrow, earthen artery. Mothers carried infants with hands pressed gently over small mouths, ensuring that not a single cry would betray their location to the world above. The ventilation reeds hummed with the cool night air, providing just enough oxygen to sustain the massive line of people moving beneath the feet of their unsuspecting masters. By the time the moon reached its zenith, the majority of the community had already passed through the false rock face and into the safety of the ravine. Emerging from the earth was like a second birth, as the escaped community breathed in the crisp air of the Virginia night and moved toward the dense cover of the western pine forests. Benjamin's meticulously scouted path led them away from the river patrols and toward the rugged, limestone gaps of the mountains where no horse or wagon could easily follow. They moved with a spectral efficiency, leaving no broken branches or heavy footprints that could serve as breadcrumbs for the professional trackers who would surely follow. Behind them, the riverside plantation sat in an eerie, hollow silence, its ledger still falsely claiming the presence of 250 souls who had already crossed into another reality. The diversity of their skills now became their greatest weapon, as scouts secured the perimeter while the elderly were assisted over the jagged terrain. They were no longer property, they were a mobile, sovereign nation disappearing into the fog of the Appalachian foothills to build a secret future. The discovery at dawn roll call sent a shockwave through the Virginia aristocracy that was so profound the state government immediately moved to suppress the details of the event. When William Hargrove looked out from his second-floor study at an empty world, he was met with the terrifying realization that his absolute control had been an elaborate, years-long illusion. State officials, federal marshals, and private investigators flooded the grounds, but they found no signs of a struggle, no stolen horses, and no clues to the direction of the mass exodus. The investigation was eventually sealed and the documents buried in the archives of the Virginia Historical Society to prevent other enslaved populations from learning of the successful rebellion. The Hargroves were left with a sprawling 4,000-acre tomb of a plantation, their wealth evaporating as quickly as the laborers who had generated it. The mystery of the empty quarters became a ghost story, whispered in Richmond, a forbidden tale of a people who simply walked out of history. In the remote, uncharted valleys of the western mountains, the vanished community established a settlement that thrived in total secrecy for nearly 3 years before it, too, faded from the maps. They utilized the tools forged by Joseph and the agricultural wisdom of Samuel to build a self-sustaining society that lived by its own laws and honored its own history. This hidden town was a miracle of engineering and social cohesion, proving that the skills stolen by the plantation system could be used to build a world of profound dignity. While the official record tried to erase their existence, the descendants of Riverside carried the truth of the tunnel and the mountain sanctuary through generations of oral tradition. The story of the 250 souls serves as a haunting reminder that the human spirit cannot be documented in a ledger or contained by brick and mortar. Their disappearance was not an act of magic, but a triumph of collective will that remains one of the greatest unwritten chapters of American resistance.